This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with Miss Elizabeth Powell, conducted by Fran on December 11, 2007. Today we're at Miss Powell's home on Westview Drive in the Five Points area of Athens. Thank you for having us here today, Miss Powell.
Oh, it's fun to have you here.
Well, we're going to have fun, I think, too. Talk to us a little bit about your life prior to coming to Athens, and how did you all end up in Athens?
Well, I never thought of it as end up before. Dad had been president of Valdosta when it was girls' school, and they were making a girls' school out of
the state normal school?
State normal, yeah. And he was a great friend of Chancellor Sanford's. Mm-hmm. He had lived with that generation of educators and all. And so Dr. Sanford asked him to come up here and start a girls' school on the coordinate campus, which had been a teacher's college for women. I don't know whether they had men out there or not.
I don't think so.
Never occurred to me to wonder. But Dad was ready for a change. He'd been down in Valdosta for 20 years or so, and he thought it'd be great to work for the university. So Mother and Dad and I moved up here, and then my younger brother moved up to join us.
When was that? What year was that?
1933.
Women were admitted to the University of Georgia in 1918, but very few. And as time went along, it grew out. At what point did they decide that the women needed to be there?
I have no idea what the thinking behind that was.
No idea about why it was separate. May not be a bad idea, y'all, to do
well,
that
now. It was separate because women were separated in those days.
I think that's true.
And it was a teacher's college. It had no connection with the university until the Board of Regents came along and put everything under the Board of Regents. And it was the same year they moved the Ag College under the university, and they moved the Teachers College under the university. In other words, they consolidated everything that was in Athens.
Put it under the umbrella of the University of Georgia.
Uh-huh.
You started the school when you got here?
I was a junior when I got here.
And
I had already been in Valdosta State for 2 years.
Did you have classes? My understanding was just freshmen and sophomore women were on coordinate campus.
Yeah, and I was, there were about 3 or 4 of us who were faculty kids, and they didn't want to send us off to Valdosta, so they arranged to have. There were some Barra daughters, granddaughters, I guess. But there were a number of us that thought we ought to be in school up here. And we were strange animals.
You were outnumbered, huh?
We were definitely outnumbered.
It was not a bad thing necessarily, was that?
No, as a matter of fact, it was a good thing mostly. We couldn't join sororities. This was the middle of the Depression, and we didn't have any money at all. They didn't pay faculty salaries if the money didn't come in. The state I think they had a law that said, if you don't have the money, you don't owe the money. And since they weren't paying faculty salaries, there were a bunch of us who had no money at all. Remember, that was a big question with sororities. We all wanted to be in a sorority, but if you belonged to a sorority, you couldn't get in the university for nothing. You had some money. So, I remember there were 2 Barrow daughters, granddaughters, I guess, and the Barrakin folks were about the only other people.
When you got here, what was your first impression of Athens and the campus in 1933?
We lived on campus out at the end of Prince Avenue in a house called the Dean's House. I think that was a later idea. But Dad was the dean at that point, and the house was called the Dean's House. And it was a huge house for 3 people, Mother, Dad, and I. We sort of put in a long-distance telephone system.
Inside, huh?
Inside, yeah. But it was on Prince Avenue, and that was nice. We didn't have to learn a lot about Athens. We could just go out Prince
I
Avenue.
was going to say Prince Avenue was sort of the main drag, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, to anybody who lived on Prince Avenue, it was the main drag.
Yeah. Lots of beautiful old antebellum homes that folks were trying
Tearing
to keep
down.
from falling in at the time, weren't they?
Tearing down.
Yeah, that was the sad part. What about, so did you go to school on Coordinate campus, or by then were you able to go on the actual North campus
We were
area?
not allowed on campus.
You couldn't go on North campus at all?
Well, yes, North campus. I never heard that before.
I'm sorry, main campus downtown?
That's where we had to go.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
We went to classes in academic building.
So you had class and academic, and but at that time, the campus was basically just that area, wasn't it? It was just in that little,
Downtown was main campus.
yeah, and it was
As
academic.
far out as I had to go was where the French department was in. Oh Lord, I don't remember what the name of that was. Good.
It may have been down in, would it have been Lacan or Park Hall or one of those down there?
Yeah, Park Hall.
Could have been down there.
At the French classes in Park Hall.
Well, it's amazing to me to look back at some of the old pictures and some of the old maps of campus to see the way things have changed. But I keep hearing people as we do these interviews saying that North Campus looks much the way it looked
Yep.
when they were in school. Do you feel that way about it?
I guess I do.
Talk a little bit more about your father's role on Coordinate Campus. He was the principal, quote unquote, right?
I don't know much about that. Dad never taught business at home. He didn't hear much about what was going on with the campus. And we didn't spend any time on the campus, on the Coordinate campus. We got up at the morning and chased off to the Arch. There wasn't any transportation in
How did you
Athens.
get downtown? Thumbing.
Yeah. And there were certain people in town who knew those thumbs. Well, there was one woman who lived in what's the president's home now, Mrs. White, I think. And she had a chauffeured car. So she'd get out there on some messy days and ride up and down Prince Avenue picking up
Girls?
girls.
How
and
nice.
taking them where they had.
Lordy mercy, if we tried to thumb today, we'd all be in trouble.
Well, we got some fake kidnappings and some real kidnappings, but they ended by noon usually.
Tell me about it. What was a typical day? You said you got up and took off for North Campus. What was a typical day like on campus when you were in undergraduate school?
Well, if you were a girl, you couldn't go to classes on the North Campus, but you had to get those senior classes if you were a junior. So somehow or another, I don't believe there were more than 5 or 6 of us
In school.
That were in that mixture. But you walked half the time. It wasn't 2 miles. And you just got out and started walking and hoped you didn't have to walk the whole thing.
And didn't think about it, did you? It was because everybody
That
was
was
doing
how
that.
you did it. Actually, Alec Ashford lived in one of the houses they tore down to enlarge the hospital. And Alec was one of the few people we knew who had a car. And he would line up schedules for everybody. And he picked us up most of the time.
Good man. Good man. Was there a shirt tail parade when you were coming along?
That was after I had finished college.
Okay. So you
I remember Bill Tate once having some garment somebody had given him because they were going to have a panty parade. And he was to have to have a panty. Well, Bill Tate wasn't up to that, so he would do most anything for you, but not that.
What was the social life like? What did you do?
Oh, it was country club.
Everybody went to the country club?
No, the university turned into a country club on
really?
Friday and Saturday.
A party school.
Party school, absolutely, for those who went to the parties.
You
But there were a lot of students who didn't even know there was parties going on.
tell me about Little Commencement. Remember the Little Commencement?
Oh, yeah. It was like, there were a lot of weekends, just like Little Commencement.
Lots of parties, big bands.
Big bands. I don't remember the names of those big bands, but they were I had a brother at Tech at the time, and Tech would have the big bands, and we would have the same big bands the next night.
Yeah, it worked out. The cooperative arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
How about extracurricular activities in terms of you went to class? Were there
Y sponsored a lot of student clubs.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I got into a poetry club,
Mm-hmm.
and I gave a program on Edna St. Vincent Millay. And about an hour later, I bumped into somebody on campus who said, "You're just what we're looking for. We got to have a program at 5 o'clock. And you did one this morning on Millay. And our subject is poets, American poets." So they talked me into, it was a written report, they talked me into taking my report over and reading it to the club.
You had double duty.
I certainly did that day. And the house mother at Sewell Hall, where the meeting was going to be, was incensed that I was there not dressed up. And I said, "But I'm not here to be dressed up. I came as I was."
Be glad to have me. I'm your program, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, Edna St. Vincent Millay now there's been a recent book about her. She's quite an interesting person.
She was not the person I gave the report about.
She's really got around, as I understand.
I thought, Ed Everett taught that course, and I'm sure he was straightforward with students, but he didn't tell us anything about Edna St. Vincent Millay.
You're the second or third person who's mentioned Dr. Everett. He must have been a favorite of people. He must have been an excellent
He
teacher.
was a great guy. Lived right over there.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about eating. You know, one of the things that we enjoy most at my house. I hear about Costa's sometimes. Do you remember Costa's?
Oh, yeah.
Which was evidently the place to gather downtown. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Bottom floor of Costa Building,
It
which
was
is now Southern Mutual.
right. It was on the ground floor.
Mm-hmm.
And was it just an ice cream parlor, or did they do? Was it just all kinds of things?
Well, that brings up another subject. The fact that I didn't live on campus
Right.
made a lot of difference in what I did.
Weren't hanging out downtown.
I wasn't hanging out. When school was over, I went home.
I hear you on that. We mentioned Dr. Everett. What memorable faculty or staff person when you were in undergraduate school had an impact on you? You were a literature major?
Mm-hmm. Everett and John Wade came the year I came. And in order to have some good reasons for hiring an extra English teacher, they had to come up with something top flight for John Wade to do, and that meant all the English students took American literature that quarter. John had a national reputation that the university didn't have many of.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know much about the science people who were here. There were science majors stayed on one. This was funny. They were on that side of the campus where the science
Up
buildings
on Ag
were.
Hill, weren't they? Over that way?
No, they were Terrell Hall,
Right.
and the library was over there. It split the campus this way instead of this way. And we saw very little of
Yeah.
science majors.
Now, the less I could have seen of the science classroom, the better off
But
I
you
was. I
like
don't know
it,
about you. You finished school, and what happened after you completed your undergraduate degree?
Well, I wanted to go to Germany to study for a year. The university had an exchange program that had 2 students in Germany and 1 in France and 1 in Italy. That was the total number of foreign students. And
So we had study abroad
not that far
even in
back.
1933, right?
Not that far back. Well, we had students studying abroad, but it wasn't. It was just 5
Mhm.
students that won the study abroad program, international education. It began to grow about that time, and then the war came along and tore the
Yeah.
whole thing up, and we started over again after the war.
Was Miss Artow,
Yeah.
Dolores Artow,
Mhm.
was she the international student study abroad person at the time?
She was the assistant dean of women, and Bill Tate used to tell the story of the time a Cuban student, I guess, South American student, came in to pay the tuition for a bunch of boys he had brought up here. He had all the money in his pocket. Bill said that was the biggest roll of money he saw. But Bill couldn't understand the boy. He had some English, but not much. And Bill had no Spanish, I guess. But they were having some trouble transferring the right amount of money from the boy to Bill. And so Bill called for Miss Artow. She was an assistant dean of women. And Dolores came to see what the trouble was. And Bill just said, "She's your kind of boy. You take care of him."
Fix it.
And so that's how Dolores became dean of the director of the
that-
foreign student program.
She was quite an interesting lady. Smart and such personality. So you went to Germany?
I went to Bob Stevens, I think, was the first German student, and I was the next one. I stayed in graduate school for a year, so I could apply because I knew Bob was going to get the first one.
That was just a given, huh?
That was a given. Bob was going to get the first one. No use applying for the same thing he was applying for. So I waited a year, and I got my chance at it.
This would have been about 34, 35, is that right?
30. Yeah, I graduated in 35.
What was Germany like at that time? Mr. Hitler was coming into power at that point, was he
Mr.
not?
Hitler was around. He didn't have much power yet. He wasn't making much trouble yet for anybody but Germans. But things were pretty rough if you got into the politics. So I had been warned to keep my choices out of that area.
Keep your opinions to yourself, huh?
Yeah. And I lived with a great German family it was about 2 miles out of downtown,
Where in Germany were you?
Hamburg. And so I went there instead of hanging around hunting something to do.
Right.
And they taught me to speak family German.
What a wonderful experience.
It was a great experience.
Open up your eyes to so much that.
My grandparents were German, so I had always wished I had more German than I had.
Yeah.
And now I've forgotten all I had then.
Just talking about Spanish earlier in the day and how if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
You really do. What you did a year over there,
Mm-hmm.
and then you came back to Athens, or you came back?
I came back to Athens, and that was the year nobody had any jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, students graduating in Athens My brother graduated from Georgia Tech that year and was one of 4 students who got jobs.
Mm.
And Georgia wasn't much better off.
Mm-hmm.
But I loafed around doing nothing. I came home in September, I guess, August or September. And finally in January, I said, something's got to give. And so I began to look around harder and found a job teaching French up in Young Harris. And I said, I don't know any French. I majored in French as an undergraduate. I said, I don't know enough. I can't speak French. I can't teach French if I can't speak French. So one day I told Mother I was going over to Atlanta and I was going to the Travelers Aid Society and see if I could get a job with Travelers Aid, because I had done a lot of traveling by then. I had seen, I guess, a dozen countries in Europe. And that was barnstorming with a little suitcase. And I felt like I could travel any way I wanted to at that point. So I went to Travelers Aid, and the woman almost cried crocodile tears because they had just hired somebody for the only vacancy they had. And they weren't sure about that hire. They weren't too proud of that. But there wasn't anything they could do about it except tell me that she was coming from the Red Cross office. And I might talk to Red Cross. They didn't know whether they were going to replace her or not, but anyway, it was worth a try. Well, I went over to Red Cross and I asked them, I hear you have a vacancy. And they said, well, yes, we still have a vacancy, but we've offered the job to a girl from Norfolk, Virginia. And I said, well, it sounds like I better get in touch with Norfolk, Virginia then. So I called the Red Cross in Norfolk, Virginia, and told them I understood they had a vacancy. And they said, we'd like to talk with you. And I heard a voice in the background saying, tell her to come on up here. We'll put her to work. Sight unseen.
Isn't that amazing? You just followed that string and it took you right to a
Took
job,
me right
didn't it?
into a job in Norfolk, Virginia. And I stayed with Red Cross for 7 years, all through the war, and then a little bit more.
Well, if you were in Norfolk, you saw lots of ships coming in and out and lots of
Uh-huh.
folks who needed your help.
They
didn't
thought
you?
I was in the Navy. I mean, it took me a long time to get that out of people's heads that I wasn't ever in the Navy.
Isn't that funny?
I worked with Red Cross in Norfolk, and that was mostly with seafaring people
Uh-huh.
and ships and things. And then I got tired of that. The city was Norfolk's a wet place, and I was always dingy. It seemed to me my clothes weren't quite dry. And I just got fed up with it after 2 or 3 years, and decided I had to find something else to do. Well, it's about the same. You know, Red Cross handles messages for lost people.
Mm-hmm.
You come to Red Cross and you can fill out a 25-word message and give them the best address you've got. And maybe someday that message will get through.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat at the desk a good bit of time taking messages from foreign born people. They were now American citizens or not. But then Red Cross looked up my record in another department and sent me down to Memphis to a hospital. I didn't know a thing about hospitals. But I became a Red Cross worker in a hospital around there and stayed at that long enough to have a real job. And about that time things began to break up. The war was over and they weren't needing as many people in the hospitals. And so they transferred me out of the hospital section to just hang around headquarters till something turned up. Well, after a while something did turn up, and I got a job on disaster relief in Mississippi. And the people in Mississippi were awfully glad somebody had come
I
down
bet.
to rescue them from the tornadoes that came through in, this was March. And I stayed in Mississippi for several months. And I was in Atlanta one day checking out something that I hadn't known about. I thought I'd go find out from headquarters. And while I was sitting there talking to the lady who had that job, a request came through for a job in Memphis again. So I went back to the hospital in Memphis, stayed there until Dad told me there was something at the university that I needed to do. Better come home and see what that was.
That sounds good.
So I came home and worked for Bill Tate for several months as Bill's assistant.
What was that like?
Well, by that time, Bill Tate was part of my family. He just went in and helped Big Brother do things. I wasn't there more than 3 or 4 months, I guess. When Rastus Lowe fell heir to what was left of the Division of General Extension, and he was being moved back from Atlanta. The thing had been moved, the office had been moved over to Atlanta at some point. And the Board of Regents had decided that was a mistake. They shouldn't have done that. So they were moving the whole thing back to Athens.
Tell us, define what general extension meant.
Extension classes off campus.
Outreach.
Yeah. Correspondence courses. It was the same thing that it ended up being practical. But I went to work for Bill Tate at that time, Bill Rastus Lowe at that time. And Rastus wasn't a tall, sure I could do that. I wasn't a tall, sure I could do it. And like most everything else I've done, you just did it. You didn't worry about whether you knew how until you learned how.
Just figured it out. Did it and figured it out.
Just figured it out.
Was that, he was the head of an overall...
he was director of the Division of General Extension.
And was that wasn't just independent study, though?
No. It was anything that was credit off campus.
So did y'all travel?
Oh, I know every crossroad in Georgia.
So y'all went out to Macon and...
My favorite story is the time we got a request for an extension class in LJ and a request for an extension class in, I'm not good with names anymore. But it turned out that those 2 towns were 8 miles apart across the mountains. And the teachers wouldn't go across the mountain after dark. They just weren't going to go if they had to go across those mountains.
A little scary.
After dark. So we had to run 2 extension classes 8 miles apart to get all the teachers that wanted to come to an extension class. And I've still wondered why we did that, but we did it.
So Rastus Lowe was the beginning of public service and outreach. Cooperative extension was going on at that time, right?
Yeah. The cooperative extension had started back in the
Was it the 20s?
1890s.
Oh, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not good at dates either.
Well, you're probably right. That was with the land grant.
The Land Grant
Act was sort of the beginning of that.
When that began.
But then...
But we didn't have anything to do with that.
Right. And so was Mr. Lowe the colonel, the stimuli or stimulus for the Georgia Center? Or I know
he had a great deal to do with getting the Georgia Center here. They had to have seed money. And Rastus told me one time that he had thought the veterans' money that was coming, veterans paid for registering and advertising courses and all. And if it was a veteran, and of course everybody was a veteran in those days that came, wanted to come get in.
They were on the GI Bill, weren't they?
And that was about $100 per veteran. And Rastus decided he better put some of that in the bank. There'll be a need for that money one of these days. And sure enough, when Kellogg came along, there was need for seed money. And Rastus had it in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else had thought of that.
Where were y'all located on campus?
Top floor of college.
I'm sorry?
Top floor of old college.
Old college. That would have been, Betsy, 1947, 1948 in there.
1947.
And so the Georgia Center was built, or
It was
54, 55, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So for 7 or 8 years, you all were it.
We were on the top floor of old college, running everything, we thought. It was an enormous time for an extension division because teachers had not been certified for a long time. I mean, that just was sort of a blank in people's mind. And teachers wanted courses at home, either correspondence. Our correspondence load got up over 5,000.
Gosh.
It's never been anything like that since then.
How did you keep up with it? No computers.
Well, yes, there was one computer. It was duplication, a lot of it. You did it once and then you did it again.
Uh-huh. Well, now, that then translated into Europe. When you moved to the Georgia Center, you ended up being the head of the independent study program, am I right?
It was off-campus credit programs.
Okay. And what fell under that?
We had a few extension classes still. We had correspondence. I think that was enough.
I think so, too. If you had 5,000,
Uh-huh.
well, just addressing those envelopes would have taken a long time.
We won the envelopes and made the students address their paper.
Okay.
And fold up the paper and run it into the window envelope. Rastus thought I was impossible. Red Cross, knew all about these business things. And every time he asked me, well, where did you find out about that? I said, Red Cross.
A good beginning, though, Red Cross, huh? Well, talk about, you got your master's degree in 1954, right? So you were going to school at the same time you were working.
Yeah.
You had a full, rich life.
Well, the university wasn't a top-notch school at that time, is the only explanation of it. It was still a boys' school, more or less. Had a few girls around, but not many. It'd be interesting to know what the percentages were.
The population looked like. Well, boy, it's girls now, I'll tell you
It
that.
sure is.
A huge percentage. You were on campus when Mr. Lowe, when you all were doing the things that later on came out of the Georgia Center. What do you remember? I know Dr. O.C. Adderhole evidently had some connection with the Kellogg folks. Is that how we got the Georgia Center? What precipitated?
Let me see if I can remember that story because it was a good story.
Good. Okay.
There was a man over in Ag Extension, Mr. Nicholson,
Okay.
who had made movies for the Kellogg people. It was a brand new idea to have teaching movies. And he had made some and was the only person Kellogg's knew, really. And they asked him one day if the university would be interested in copying, more or less, the program that they had just set up at Michigan State. And they sat there and described what they were talking about. And Mr. Nicholson said, yeah, I can bring somebody up here to talk to you that can do that. So he took Billy Collins, and I think Rastus, I'm not sure about that, I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And the car full of men drove up to Michigan State and spent 2 or 3 days going over the program they had just put in with Kellogg money. And they asked him if he thought the Kellogg people wanted to know if he thought the university would be interested in sending a team up to look at that program. Maybe, see, we already had Ag Extension, and we already had the place for a general extension program. Anyway, Rastus said it looked too good to be true when they began to describe what they wanted to do, and he began to describe what we were already doing, but with no connection. And he wanted to fill in some vacancies. Well, Dr. Masters was the man at Kellogg.
This was Dr. Hugh Masters.
Yeah. And somebody told me later that Hugh Masters knew what he wanted, and he found it right there, and nobody else had a chance after that. Rastus was going to have to give up his head of department, and that build on that.
That's tough. So Dr. Masters
came down
to run the center.
Well, it wasn't a center at all yet. It was just a program.
It was the beginning of an idea, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What happened to Mr. Lowe?
He moved over to be the business manager of the program.
So Dr. Masters got down here, and he had a strong connection with Kellogg, right?
Yeah, he had been the director of the developing programs. So he brought
knew he wanted to come from Michigan to Georgia. That was a good move. Get out of that snow.
Well, maybe it was a snowy day.
So he came down, and then did we ante up anything to help bring the center down here?
That's where Rastus's
seed money came in.
Seed money went.
He must have had some powerful seed money then.
It was a lot of money, but it wasn't too much money.
Well, and then they built the initial part of the center up there in that pecan grove off of Lumpkin Street, right?
Yeah, uh-huh.
It is interesting how things happen sometimes.
It just kept growing from that.
Well, now tell me how you ended up with independent study.
Nobody else wanted it. That's absolutely the truth.
Oh.
The program had started and it had been growing. And all of a sudden, they had this nice big program, and none of the men wanted to touch it. They didn't want to waste their time on that little stuff. School teachers.
Well.
And I was sitting in the right chair.
We're glad you were there.
I was glad I was there too.
You mentioned men at the time. This was an interesting, your time at the university was an interesting time because I think it was a time when, as you said, women weren't on campus much.
Well, they were out on Coordinate campus.
Right, and then as time went along, more and more women became involved, and certainly you were an assistant professor and in a job in the head of a department?
I wasn't an assistant professor until a lot longer after that.
Till later after that?
No, we had a big battle when I insisted on being an assistant professor. Everybody around me was an assistant professor.
And they were all men?
And they were all men. And I was doing the same thing they were doing. I had the same qualifications they had.
So you stood up and told them about it?
I just stood up and stomped my feet.
Good for you. You helped the rest of us. Who did you talk to? What did you have?
Mostly Rastus. He was all for it. And I remember Tom Mailer sent a request through for faculty status, and they sent it back to him, said they weren't interested in that right now. So I raised a little more cane. They got tired of me crossing the threshold.
So it's sort of the Chinese water torture. You just kept
I
going
just kept going into Tom Mailer's office when he told me to get out. There was a girl in sociology, and there was Tom. I think it couldn't have been Tom Mailer's wife. She never taught. It was some woman over in education who've never got a promotion. But the three of us would take turns
Going to see people?
going to see Tom Mailer because he was the one who had to sign the request for the job, for the title. And Tom, this was push and shove. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to face anybody with anything. And it was all right with him that I wasn't a faculty status.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what faculty status he had at that point.
Because he didn't have an upper level degree, did he?
No.
He didn't have a doctorate.
He had done all the work for the doctorate, but Columbia wouldn't give him the degree for some reason. I never dug into that.
Yeah, maybe. Well, y'all evidently went enough because you did get faculty status eventually.
Strangely enough, Dr. Oh Lord, what was his name? He sat at the desk in old college. I'll have to work on that. I'll think of that.
Okay, think of who that was.
He used to pass by here every afternoon going home. He lived down there, but I can't remember his name. But he insisted that I couldn't retire until
you got your status?
Until he got that straightened out. He had been applying for it, and I didn't have anything to do with it.
A good man to know.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. What, the university, we talk about basically a threefold mission. It's teaching, research, and service. And I guess, as you said, Betsy, public service had been something that because of the land grant designation, we've been doing some, but certainly not to the extent that we're involved now. How do you look at that?
I used to tell people that what I looked for on campus was a faculty member who had small children. He needed the extra $200. Could always find some young man who needed an extra $200.
So he'd grade independent study lessons for you?
Yeah, he would teach at the extension class, or he would grade papers, or whatever had to be done. He was looking for that extra $200.
So you mean public service might not have been their driving force, but a few extra dollars in the
I think
paycheck.
Probably it was one of the things they would not have cut out, but they wouldn't have done anything to help it get going.
Interesting perspective. What to you over the years have been the biggest changes on campus from your perspective?
The lawn.
The lawn?
Yeah.
Well,
There was a fellow who was the caretaker of the campus, Mr. Weinberger, good old German immigrant. And he had gotten tired of the students walking on his grass. Probably threw seed out there and it got walked on. That was the end of that. So he made some signs and put around on the paths that had been worn by students taking shortcuts. And let me see if I can remember one of them. For us to admire this, oh Lord, I've said it so many times I should be able to put it right out.
it's all right. Did he ride a horse?
Yeah.
We've heard about him before. He obviously was somebody that made an impression on folks of your era.
He made an impression on it because he planted grass where there'd never been grass before. And he fussed at everybody that stepped on it. Pause to admire as you pass, but do not step on this young grass.
Well, they do a wonderful job now, I'll say that, if that's what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
The physical plant just does a beautiful job with the landscaping and the way things look. And what about, well, we talked about gender equity a little bit, and that's changed some, but there's still
Got a long way to go.
Yeah, there's still a little bit of a glitch there too, a gap there. whatever, you talked about Dean Tate, and everybody we've talked to, Betsy, has had a Dean Tate story, and you were lucky to have worked with him 3 or 4 months, even if it was just 3 or 4 months. Do you have any Dean Tate stories that we need to get down besides your?
I expect all the Dean Tate stories have been told.
Well,
about
that may be. That very well could be. What other personalities on campus or folks over your time there?
They're not a dime a dozen. You don't have many of that kind around.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's why we hear so much about Bill Tate.
One of my favorite stories about him was about during the segregation time. Bill Tate usually worked late at his desk, and one night George Parthemus had sit in his office, and he'd been trying since 4 o'clock to get those students out of his office. And finally he thought of throwing Poda, his daughter, in on this. She was a kid at that time. And so he told the students that were sitting there that he'd make a deal with him. He had to go to his daughter's recital, piano recital. But he'd meet them back here. He wasn't kicking them out. He was just putting them aside till he took care of Poda. So they made an agreement with him that they'd give him 2 hours to go to Poda's recital, and they'd expect him back at such and such a time. So George went off to the recital, and the students went wherever they went. The recital was over, so George headed back to his office, and he saw a light in Bill Tate's window. Thought, I better tell somebody what I'm into. So he went up and told Bill Tate that he was going back to his office to meet these students. They hadn't been rough, it hadn't been just a matter of sitting there. Well, Bill knew better than to think the story would stop there. So he told them enough to get them off to the police office, sheriff's office, or whatever. And by the time Bill got to his office, it was surrounded by sheriffs.
Everybody was there.
That was the end of that sit-in.
A founding member of the Recording for Blind chapter, and I know you are so proud of that. Talk to us about how you ever got on to, how did you learn about Recording for the Blind?
I read the newspaper. Now, Vogue magazine had a story. It must have been around this time of the year, because it listed a number of places that could use volunteer help. And don't go buy a lot of Christmas presents. Give your money to somebody that needs it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then he had listed a bunch of volunteer groups that needed help. And Recording for the Blind, of course, was one of them. They were top society ladies, most of them. And they had gotten their name on the list of people who needed not only money, but help. People who could read well enough to get recorded. And that was the lead editorial in Vogue magazine that month.
Now this was was this right after the war, Betsy? Yeah.
54.
54.
I started Recording for the Blind and the gerontology program. There was another one, I don't remember that one. But it was that same year, they just seemed to bubble out.
Mm-hmm. What did it take to get a chapter down here? I mean, this group was...
I wrote to Mrs. McDonald and said I wanted to know more about how she got a program, what kind of equipment did she use, that we had a home study program, but we needed to take it off paper, get it liver than it was. And could you give me some hints of how they ran their program, because that was just what I was looking for. And I didn't hear anything from her. Long about Easter time, I got a telephone call from New York. Her secretary wanted to know whether we had AC or DC current. And I said, well, tell me more.
Whoa.
What am I getting into? And the secretary said she wants to come down and bring you some equipment if you can use it. I said, well, I can always use good equipment. Well, they were using secretarial, I don't remember the name of that thing. It was a little green box about this big. And you put a green plastic
tape on it, didn't you?
No, a record, a floppy record.
Oh.
Put on your little green box and dictate it to your secretary. And then she took it off with earphones.
Yeah. Dictaphone, that's right.
Dictaphone, that's it, yeah, dictaphone. So she came, the secretary said she'll be getting in touch with you again, but we needed to know whether it was AC or DC. Oh, stupid me, I didn't know. What's the difference between AC and DC?
Alternating and direct, and I don't know what that means.
Well, it means that the messages are sent through the air or they're sent on the wire, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, one day there was a telephone call. Miss McDonald's coming down tomorrow. Is that convenient for you? I said, well, I'll make it convenient real quick. And so she came down on that old Southern train that used to come in here at the crack of dawn and called me up from the Georgian Hotel and said, my secretary made a reservation, but she forgot to tell me where it was. You don't have a hotel by the name of what she gave me. And I said, well, it was probably the Georgian, but I'll check it out for you, call you back. Well, she came in on that early morning train, and I went down to the Georgian Hotel at 7 o'clock to meet her. And she was sitting in the lobby because the hotel guests hadn't
opened yet?
The hotel was open, but the guests that were there hadn't moved out. So they was.
She didn't have a room.
She didn't have a room. She was just sitting there. She said, I've sat in hotel lobbies before. It didn't bother me. The most elegant woman I think I ever saw, just plain country, from South Carolina, who had gotten into the junior league in New York, and this was her project, to establish recording for the blind as a national thing and not as just a New York thing. Beautifully dressed. I mean, it's a very elegant person. And I was running around him what I usually had on campus. Don't look like help for you. But she was fun. We had 2 good days talking about how you start a program and what you do. Well, by the second afternoon, I had sat down, well, that night, I guess, I sat down at the telephone and called
everybody you knew.
Everybody I knew. We got, at that time, we were using the basement of the library for
recording?
No, for a meeting place.
This was the regional library or the university library?
The library that was the original university library.
Oh, okay.
That was what we were using for conferences and any kind of bigger meeting than your department could take care of. And so I called all these people and told them. I remember Mary Ann Hodson. I told Mary Ann to get herself and anybody else that she knew that could speak English and maybe some other languages. But let's make a big showing of this thing. So we had a big showing. I think there were about 50 people there. And Mrs. Hugh Hodson showed up. And she was going to get into this too. We ended up with enough volunteers to start it. And Mrs. McDonald mailed us the little green box. And we started recording for the blind. And then about, not very much after that, Mary Ann came into my office. I had to give it up. I had enough to do with the job I had.
Yes, you did.
Without adding on this stuff. And so I had found a box the right size and had packed the whole thing up, and it was sitting in the corner of the office waiting for me to take it to the post office. And Mary Ann came in, and she swears she didn't say this, but she said, "You're making a mess of recording for the blind. Would you let me have it?" I said, "It's all packed up and
Right
ready
there.
for me right there." So
Well,
Mary Ann took over,
And look at it now, though.
yeah.
Aren't you proud?
Well, I'm glad.
Oh, my.
I didn't know that many people needed it, but
Goodness
I'm glad we
gracious.
were there when they did.
Yeah, I think that's you've touched a lot of people's lives with that. Talk about your orchids.
My cousin in Atlanta grew orchids. He was a doctor, and he had 2 greenhouses in his backyard and parked his car at the door. And he had for years had Richard, his colored help, and he turned that whole place into just a fun orchid growing thing. And I didn't know much about it. I saw it when I went to see his wife, was usually at home. Go see Fran and peep into the greenhouse to see what was blooming, if anything. But Mother had green thumbs and green fingers and everything else. Everything she touched grew if possible. And I decided I got to have something like that, but not hers, not her game. So I decided I'd grow orchids. I didn't know a thing about them. I didn't know what it was going to take or anything else. But she grew African violets, and everyone in the house was full of African violets. I thought, I got to stay out of that field. So I got a couple of orchid plants from I got them from Chicago, from a greenhouse business that was about 3 blocks from where my grandmother had lived. And I thought, if I can grow anything, I can grow it where grandmother lived. She lived to be 97. So I ordered some plants. Mother went by and blessed them. And they grew very nicely. And then I realized I hadn't done anything to them but put them in some pots and follow the directions. So I got 2 more plants. And I finally got up to 250 plants. And that was when I decided I better back off a little bit.
You must have inherited some of that green growing gene, though. So
Very little of it. As one of the articles in one of the journals one time said, I don't talk about the ones I killed. That's a good place to stop.